Okay, we're ready to go.
Okay, I'll call this December 15th session of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. First item on our agenda tonight is the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. McKnight, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight?
Certainly. I pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Ms. Lowe, we call the roll.
Chairman
Here.
Mayor Ream,
Here.
Alderman Whitmire,
Here.
Mr. Bolazina. I thought I saw him somewhere. I note that he's here.
Give us a thumbs up, Dennis. There you go.
I'm here.
Mr. McKnight,
Present.
Mr. Malin Smith,
Here.
Dr. O'Mill,
Here.
and Mr. White.
Here.
I have Miss Miller and Miss Monzell absent. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Lowell. Next item is the approval of the minutes from our November 17th, 2021 meeting. Do I have a motion? Mr. White, and do I have a second? Seconded by Mayor Ream. Discussion or amendments? Mr. Millen Smith.
I would propose an amendment on page 4 under point 2, the preliminary site development plan. It references me making a motion for condition R, which was subsequently and appropriately withdrawn, but the text of the minutes shows the 2 elevations in reverse sequence. And so it should read exterior design to include a portico on the Ballas Road side of the building, matching the Clayton Road side of the building. And while that matter was withdrawn, I think the minutes should reflect it accurately because it's a matter that should be taken up by ARB.
Thank you, Mr. Malin Smith. We have a proposed amendment. Do I have a second? Seconded by Mayor Ream. Any discussion on the amendment? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed signify by saying nay. Motion appears to carry unanimously. All right, we have an amended motion for the approval of the minutes. Any further discussion or amendments? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed signify by saying nay. Motion appears to carry unanimously. Okay. New business. First item tonight is a conditional use permit. A request has been made by Tim Nay, owner, for approval of a conditional use permit for an accessory structure, a permanent outdoor game court to be located at 12711 Post Oak Road in the Estate Zoning District. I'll call for my presenter tonight. Is it, who is my presenter tonight? Mr. Poston? Mr.
Yes,
May?
that would be me.
Okay, great. Will you please state your name and address for the record?
Matthew Poston, designer at THD Design Group. Our address is 148 Chesterfield Industrial Boulevard, Suite E of Chesterfield, Missouri, 63005. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Poston. Do you have a presentation for us tonight, or?
I do. Ryan, do you have the everybody has the documents that were provided?
They do.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I first want to start by thanking all of you for taking time out of your evenings, especially during this busy holiday season, to hear this request for the conditional use permit recommendation for approval of the proposed multi-purpose sport court, so to speak, or a concrete pad located at 12701 Post Oak Road. I'm speaking on behalf of Mr. Tim and Miss Mary Nay, owners of the property. The owners are seeking to get a sport court as part of a overall multiple site improvement project for the property. They have a vision of utilizing as much of the property as they can, being that it's 3 acres. They really want to take advantage of all that space. The property itself is a steep slope from north to south, and doesn't really have much terrain for many outdoor activities. So the purpose of the sport court would be for them to have areas of recreation for themselves and younger generations of the family, to do things like roller hockey, pickleball, bike riding, younger ones with power wheels, those kind of things that the property just doesn't lend itself to being able to be used for currently. We have provided a landscape plan showing that they will be that the portion of the western and eastern sides along with the entire southern portion of the sport court area. That will serve as a visual buffer between Post Oak Road and the neighbor directly to the east. I believe that's pretty much it. Some of the other improvements, if you're interested for the property, they're looking to revise their current driveway. And it has a significant grade change from street level heading up the driveway. So part of the project will be to flatten some of that out as well, and make their property a little bit more accessible. But I guess if anyone has any questions or would like for me to answer, I'd certainly be glad to.
Do I have questions? Alderman Whitmire.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for being here tonight. Appreciate your time as well. The drive going up from the circle up to the sport court is a 10-foot wide drive, I think. Is that right?
It's proposed as 12-foot wide.
12 feet. What will they use a 12-foot wide drive to get up to the sport court for?
Well, with that area and with the landscaping up there, the idea was to provide access to a maintenance company to perform that landscaping. Every year doing the remulching, those kind of.
So you're saying this is to provide a surface for a landscaping truck to be able to move up toward that facility?
Yeah, for them to get a pickup truck up there. Yeah.
Other questions or discussion? Mr. McKnight.
I guess following up on that, is that going to be a permanent surface that you put there, permanent drive there, or is that a temporary drive that's drawn in?
We have it shown as proposed as concrete. If it's for them to get up there on a yearly basis, we would prefer it to be a permanent surface, yes.
Okay.
Alderman Whitmire.
Yes. Have you spoken to the neighbor to the north? The David Strage or Strag or Strieg? I don't know how to say his name.
I would have to.
Yeah, I have not. I do not know my neighbor to the north. They come in off of Horton Lane. So I've talked to their children, but I've not talked to him about it.
Thank you.
Further discussion or questions? Mr. McKnight.
One of the things that comes up with the 12-foot driveway there, I mean, one of the things I don't want a sport court to become is a parking area. So I'm trying to figure out if we could put a condition on here, if it'd be acceptable to have a condition that vehicles will not be parked overnight on the sport court's surface. Is that something that would be, I'm just thinking to myself, it would be easy to have a configuration like that and say, oh yeah, bring your friend and their RV and have them park in my sport court for a week or something. And I think that would be beyond the scope of what we want a sport court to be used for.
And Mr. McKnight, I have no issue with that requirement.
Yeah, that is not the intent for sure.
No, and I see that. I'm just trying to make sure that we're heading off. I mean, normally when I think of sports courts,
absolutely.
I don't think of driveways to them. So, okay.
No issue whatsoever if we want to build that into the ordinance.
Alderman Whitmire.
So as we're thinking about that condition, you might want to think about how you refer to a vehicle. If they're going to be using little trucks and stuff, little battery operated trucks, that's a vehicle, right? Go-karts, I'm just making stuff up, but Rich or Will, you're really talking about
Could be licensed vehicles or something like
licensed
that.
vehicles, yeah.
Yeah.
The real deal.
So I would propose then, well, I guess we haven't gotten to.
We don't have a
approval, so
motion yet, so.
My apologies.
Yeah.
Yep. I'll wait for that.
All right, further discussion or questions? Mr. Bolzina.
Yes, we don't have a tree plan or a site plan, but we do note that there's a walking path that's anticipated for the north side of this sport court. And if we're going to put a walking path in, we're probably going to knock down whatever vegetation is over there on the north side. So I am a little concerned about addressing perhaps the north side neighbor who maybe we don't know who they are, but their house, at least from an aerial picture, their house seems to be closest to this sports court than anybody else's house. And whether any consideration is being given, and I don't know what kind of vegetation is between that house and their property line, but so if we can get some information on what that looks like and whether we need to address some buffer for their benefit would be helpful to our consideration.
There is currently a tree line in between the two properties. At this time of year, the undergrowth isn't significant. I believe in one of the photos, I believe from the south side of the proposed sport court area looking northerly, you can kind of see the back corner of that house. It is my understanding that Mr. Ney took that photo kind of centered in the sport court area. Is that correct, Tim?
That's correct. And there's a lot of honeysuckle that separates our two properties. So that barrier is primarily honeysuckle. Some small trees, but primarily honeysuckle.
Further questions or discussion? Alderman Whitmire.
Another new guy question. So is it normal for us to consider a matter when we have not heard from an adjacent neighbor like this situation?
Yes, I mean, I think in this case, Ms. Lowe, maybe you can speak to any kind of notification that might have gone out on this item.
So since this is a conditional use permit, the public hearing is actually at the Board of Aldermen level. So before that meeting, there will be a notice put in their yard. We'll have notification through a newspaper, and then also everybody within 300 feet of the property will be notified. So anybody that gets that is more than welcome to, make their comments known to the Board of Aldermen.
Mr. Ney and his wife had reached out, I know, to the properties directly adjacent, except for the gentleman to the north, as he mentioned, he didn't know him. He had received, support for the project from those adjacent neighbors.
Ms. Lowell, this seems like a good time if you could let us know about any public comments we might have received.
We did receive one public comment that was sent to the commission this evening from a Susie Wells. So that will be attached to the minutes of this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions or discussion? Is there a motion to recommend approval of the conditional use permit with conditions as set forth in the staff report to the Board of Aldermen?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. McKnight. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Alderman Whitmire. Any further discussion or amendments?
I'm thinking of it. Give me a minute.
Mr. McKnight?
Give me 1 second.
It's gonna be a good one. I can feel it.
Better be good.
No, it's not gonna be good.
Shakespeare. All right, we're going to put you on the clock, Mr. McKnight.
Okay, here's what I come up with.
All right, go ahead.
I propose an amendment to conditional use permit amendment H or condition H. No motor vehicle or trailer shall be parked on the sport court surface overnight.
Suggestion?
Please.
Let me get a second
Well,
first. I have a
yeah.
second.
No second.
Motion fails to gather a second.
Dennis, you want to try it?
Oh, seconded by all. Wait a minute, we got one now. Mr. Malin Smith has seconded it. All right. All right, discussion, Mr. Bolzino.
I thought Mr. McKnight was also referring to the driveway leading up to the sports court. So maybe I was wrong, but I understand that we don't want licensed, well, if we say licensed vehicle, I mean.
I said motor
It's in
vehicle.
motor
or trailer.
vehicle.
Motor vehicles, okay. So motor vehicles on the sports court itself. I didn't know whether you omitted or changed your mind about the driveway leading to the sports court.
I was trying to differentiate, or trying to figure out how to differentiate that driveway from their main driveway. And I didn't want to limit them from being able to put a trailer on their main driveway. So if you have a suggestion.
Well, it could be described as the driveway, as the portion of the driveway that extends to the sports court, and the sports court shall not be used for the parking of motor vehicles.
Yeah, on the plans, I believe we call it proposed sport court access drive.
Okay, great.
So
Fabulous.
I think that if you use that verbiage, it will match the submitted
Fabulous.
use permit.
All right, Mr. Bolzino, would you like to propose an amendment to the motion?
The amendment would be saying something like there will no parking of motor vehicles will be allowed on the sports court and would we say access
Drive, yes.
access driveway to the sports court, period.
Ms. Lowell?
So, Mr. McKnight, correct me if I'm wrong, but your condition said that there shall be no parking overnight.
Yes. So I said no motor vehicle. So I think, and Dennis, correct me if this would be it would be to make it no motor vehicle or trailer shall be parked on the sport court or the access driveway to the sport court overnight.
I don't know what's significant. Well, I guess if we're talking about a truck servicing the landscape group.
That's what I was thinking. Yes.
So, okay, overnight's fine.
Does that fit with what your amendment was?
Sure, yeah.
There we go. So moved.
So
by
that's what you want your amendment.
Mr. Bolzino. Do I have a second for the amendment?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. White, as I see. All right, discussion on Mr. Bolzino's amendment. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed signify by saying nay. Motion appears to carry unanimously. We have an amended motion. Any further discussion on the amendment or the amendment to the motion? We're back to Mr. McKnight's now. Yes, condition G. All right. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed signify by saying nay. Motion appears to carry unanimously. All right, we have an amended conditional use permit with item G now. Any further discussion or amendments on conditional use permit item number 1 tonight? Alderman Whitmire.
Yeah, I guess this is a question of the developer or the landowner in the sense that there's been no additional planting on the north side of the court to help the neighbor to the north in terms of screening. Was that considered and you rejected it because some other reason, or?
Yeah, my view is in the summer that is blocked with that honeysuckle. That's why we didn't put any more screening up there. Alderman Whitmire.
Okay, thank you. So you're relying on existing vegetation to screen the.
That's right. Now, this time of year, you can't see, obviously, with the tree, the leaves off the honeysuckle in the trees.
Yep.
But most of the year, it's blocked.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. White.
Regarding the honeysuckle, I assume it's on both properties?
Yeah, it's right on that. There's an easement, an Ameren easement right there.
Oh, I missed that.
And it's running right down those power lines.
Okay. Okay.
I've cleared quite a bit out of that area to create the areas for the walking path, but left a barrier between us for that specific reason of I wanted the privacy. My neighbor had the privacy.
Okay.
Mr. McKnight.
One of the questions that came up is I always think about when I think of sports courts, I think of basketballs bouncing and noise on the court. But seeing as how you're next to 270, is that, I mean, there's a lot of sound, I'm assuming, from 270 in there anyway. So I guess I'm looking at it thinking that that's probably not as big a concern as some of the other sports courts we've had to deal with. Is that what you see too?
Yeah, there's a little bit of noise, and quite frankly, both my neighbors to the north and to the east have basketball hoops up. So there's bouncing balls already. If we would go, the primary purpose was thinking pickleball in a place for that surface to ride bikes and skate. But someday we could think about a basketball hoop as well.
Okay.
Further discussion or amendments? Ms. Lowell, we call the roll.
Mr. Malin Smith,
Aye.
Dr. O'Mell,
Aye.
Mr. White,
Aye.
Alderman Whitmire,
Aye.
Mr. Bolazino,
Yes.
Mr. McKnight,
Yes.
Mayor Reem,
Yes.
and Chairman Sema.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Nay. Mr. Posen.
Thank you all very much for your time. Appreciate it. Have a wonderful holiday season, folks.
Yes, thank you all, gentlemen.
You too.
I appreciate it.
You.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 2 tonight is zoning text amendment of regulations pertaining to oversight and management of tree studies, section 405.335 natural resource protection standards. Call for our presenter, Mr. Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The intent of this proposed amendment is to give responsibility for oversight and management of tree studies that are required as part of the development of subdivisions to the city of Town and Country. The language as currently proposed says that the city of Town and Country shall select the certified arborist or landscape architect and have responsibility and oversight for their work. The cost of the tree stand delineation study shall be the responsibility of the developer. As staff mentioned in the work session, staff would prefer the language to read: the city of Town and Country shall approve the certified arborist or landscape architect while maintaining responsibility and oversight of the work that is done by the arborist selected by the developer. Again, the intent is to put the city more into the process as these important tree studies are developed with new subdivisions. We don't have very many new subdivisions, one a year on average. But when we do, the question of trees is often an important one and much discussed. So the intent of this ordinance, again, is to have the city staff be more involved with the development of these plans to understand what is being decided by the arborist in terms of the health and condition of the trees, and then also how the proposed subdivision relates to these existing trees on site.
Mr. Malin Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like us to begin by hearing from Alderman Whitmire. I believe he's the initiator of this proposal, and I saw it as a prudent process improvement. And so I would benefit from hearing from Alderman Whitmire as to what the intent was as he began this.
Alderman Whitmire.
Sure. I guess just based on our most recent experience, the thought was that to put the responsibility for this work more directly under the control of the city made sense. I am stuck a little bit on the word select versus approve, because it does seem that if we are selecting the arborist and then paying that arborist using money from someone else to pay them, it really makes them accountable to us in terms of performing their work in a professional and forthright manner. But that's the objective in and of itself, is just to strengthen that accountability for that third party, strengthen that accountability to the city.
Mr. White.
Yes, that's the point I was trying to make in our staff meeting. I really think when we were discussing the Greystone property, we all felt a little bit emasculated because the arborist was not working for the city. He was working for the applicant, and then we were having to reject what he was proposing. And I think the better approach would be one where the arborist is responsible to the city.
Mr. McKnight.
You're on mute. Will.
You're muted.
Apologies. Mr. Ryan, I guess I'm still a little confused on this change, because as I'm reading, so you're saying that the document we've looked at is not the wording that you'd like to have on this, right? The one that I have in my hand is not the wording of what we should try and approve tonight. Is that what I'm hearing?
As originally drafted, it says select. After talking to the city attorney, he and I both agree that we're somewhat crossing of a line in terms of.
Well, I also think there might be another error in here too that we probably should take a look at, because I'm looking on, and I'm assuming that E-code is where our most up-to-date code is, correct? Where I can find the most up-to-date code?
Yes, sir.
Because I'm reading E-code, Part B, Woodlands, Section 2A, E-code stops it at the word easements. So shall be performed by a certified arborist and landscape architect is not currently listed on E-code. And that doesn't even read correctly as I read it.
No, it should be shall be performed by a certified arborist or landscape architect.
A developer shall, utility line easement shall, but that wording doesn't even make sense when I try to read it through. So,
Okay.
but it's not currently on E code that way. And I guess I'm looking at it thinking to myself, this feels a little bit like it's not ready yet. And it might be useful to go through another round of revisions.
I sense
kind of
that as
thinking
well. I welcome any feedback. There's no pressure to recommend approval of this tonight. And we can wordsmith this and get the right result.
And the one thing that I note about it is it seems like we took the intent of this was we've noted a couple times, and I know Mr. Garrett didn't have the benefit of having been in those conversations, but there's been a couple times where the applicant hires an arborist who I believe we would approve. These are names, Loomis, and them, they're names that are respected, and we would say that's great. And then some trees come in and they're labeled poor, and Ryan goes out on site and goes, "Come on, really? That's poor? All right, we'll go ahead and upgrade it to fair." So, so this started with the idea. It made me think of traffic studies where we have our own traffic study that's working for us to sort of corroborate what we're seeing. And then that got changed into, well, could we use the same one and have the applicant pay for it? So that's how we got where we were. But I think the intention is to get the cities to have, so that Ryan's not going out arguing with the arborist. We have some, some way to handle that. Ms. Lowe.
I'd also like to point out that with these kind of developments, such as subdivisions, we do collect a deposit to be used for any kind of legal fees that may come up pertaining to it, engineering fees, and it's also expanded into landscape architects or arborists, things of that nature. So if there's any kind of issues or questions that staff has, we could potentially reach out to an arborist to have those looked at, and that would be charged against that deposit. Or if it gets to this kind of level in the United States, we could also do that as well.
Mr. Garrett?
Yeah, and again, I may be late to this game, but when I look at it looks like 2A, all they're doing is essentially a survey that every survey should pretty much show the same thing. It would appear to me based on 2A. But my question is the arborist in 2A to be different from the arborist in 2F?
No.
Because we're asking in 2F, we're saying that there has to be an arborist approved by the city there. And then in 2A, it's going to be an arborist.
That was another point I wanted to make, is we're approving twice, I guess, at that.
But should it be the same arborist? Was it intended to be the same arborist? I'm not sure.
It was intended. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I
just will still, again, I'm not the city landscaper. I'm not the city psychologist. I'm the city lawyer, and my concern about it is if we get sued, it's easier for me to defend if we've selected, or excuse me, if we've approved and not selected. That's all I have to say. However, having said that, I will say that the functions of the arborist, as I see them in 2A, that I'm not as concerned about it, because it's not like they're, it would seem to me that any survey that's supposed to be done like that is going to be done the same way. So,
well, they are going to list the conditions of the trees. They have to do that, especially as it relates to grand trees, because if you're removing good grand trees, you're going to be hit with a replacement cost, or a number of trees that have to be replanted. Now, if the trees are considered poor by the arborist, then you're not hit by that cost. So that's where the rating system comes into play. And I think where the issue was with Greystone, where I questioned the rating of poor, and then it became fair, and then we were able to extract replacement trees.
Does it say somewhere here that they tell you the condition of the trees? Maybe I
It's
missed
under
it.
the grand tree section, which is letter C.
Well, I believe it's in the definition of the delineation.
I think Dennis is correct as well, yes.
I think that's been the issue, Steve. It's, all they have to get is a pour and suddenly there's no replacement. And, in this, at least in a couple of cases, Ryan just asking a question suddenly got it upgraded to fair and now there's replacement. So it's a little subjective is our concern.
I guess my question is how much, I mean, if you're looking for control of the arborist, maybe there's a different way to do that, but I'm not sure I see a great difference between approving the arborist and selecting the arborist, but that's just my.
Yeah, I think.
And you're looking for more control, and I guess my concern is too much control. Is it?
Got it. I guess if the city wanted to hire its own arborist to do a study and then ask the applicant to comply with what our arborist said, would that be acceptable?
I'm not saying it would be better, in my opinion. I'm not saying that us them hiring an arborist that we select is unacceptable. I'm just saying that it's not. I just have some concern about the city placing itself in a position of having such great control over this that somebody comes back in and says, "Hey, you're taking my property because you're making me hire people that are side with you, and that's unfair, and that helps me to make my taking case." That's all. That's my point. I'm not saying that by our selecting the arborist, that puts us in a perfect position, but I think it puts it in a lesser position.
Is it different than when the city hires? So we regularly, the applicant would hire a traffic engineer and we would hire our own traffic engineer to provide us additional data. Is this different in some way because it's related to trees on their property instead of to public streets?
I mean, in my opinion, the concern I have is the more control the professional has over my development, that professional that you're making me hire, that you've selected, the greater the argument that the regulation's unreasonable. I'm not saying it's per se unreasonable. I'm just pointing that out. I have some concern about it. I'm not going to lose sleep over it.
Alderman Whitmire.
And to that point, if we had 3 arborists that we used in rotation, one after another, approved by the city in advance, and we had agreed with those arborists in advance, what the objective criteria are in terms of, identifying the characteristics of the trees on that property. And we say, you're the next guy up. So it's, you get option B. It's this company. They're the guys that are going to do the work. And this is how much it's going to cost. I mean, to me, it's a fairly, what's the word I'm looking for? Benign way to get someone involved to get the work done on our behalf.
It's my concern is it's still your guy.
Yep. Okay.
Now, maybe it's I would reiterate that whether we're selecting the architect or approving up front the arborist, or approving up front the arborist that they select, not a tremendous difference, but I just think that the latter is a safer way to go. And maybe it's not, for the reason that we're having this discussion, you're wanting more control, and I get that. But that's what's going to be shoved our way if there's a lawsuit. And I'm not saying we'll lose it because of that. As I said, I'm just the lawyer. I'm telling you that, I like to see these things, written in a way that is more defensible as far as I'm concerned if we get into litigation. And I guess I don't see a huge difference between us approving the arborist and us selecting the arborist.
A lot of hands up. We'll go Mr. Bolazina, Mr. White, then Mr. McKnight. Mr. Bolazina.
Yeah, I think this is I think our attorney is touching on a very important point. And even the language about having the city be having the responsibility and oversight of their work is also, I think, a stretch. So I think the comparison to the traffic studies is very good. And, if we don't, for some reason, believe the traffic study, and as has been pointed out, we have deposit money to go hire our own traffic engineer to verify, to say either the assumptions in this traffic study are correct or they're not correct. I mean, the traffic study is very much like this arborist. There's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of assumptions that go into that report. And the thing that I look for in the traffic report to attack when I don't believe them is the assumptions that are being made, and then the results follow those assumptions. The same thing happens with this arborist. So, you look at a tree and you have to give it a label. Is it poor? Is it fair? I don't know. There might be some arborist book out there that tells the arborist how to make a decision between those two categories, but it is still subjective. So I'm saying that probably the better approach here, I mean, we can approve the arborist. I don't have any problem with that. I don't want a list of city arborists because new arborists come along, and I think having a list is anti-competitive. So I don't want to have a city list of arborists. But we can certainly look at the credentials of an arborist that's being proposed, and we can decide whether they have the certification that we think is appropriate for the task. So, and I think if for some reason Ryan or the commission or the board thinks some of the assumptions in the arborist report don't make any sense, then the city has the right to go hire its own arborist to check those assumptions. I think that's the better approach.
Mr. White.
Contrary to that, if I've got a applicant's arborist giving me a list of trees which he thinks are ready to be cut down, who do I have as a city representative to say, well, that's not the case. These trees are viable and should remain. I'd rather be the other way around, where if we've got our own arborist, we accept his word, of course. If it has to be cut down, it can be cut down. But I'd rather be in a situation where our arborist says, this is a viable tree, and that the applicant then comes to me and says, we don't think so, we'd like it cut down. I'd rather defend a position than I would be assertive on the position, partly because I'm not sure I have the expertise to be able to contravene an arborist hired by the applicant.
Mr. McKnight.
There's a couple of points here. One of them is addressing Alderman Whitmire's suggestion, and as I was hearing the rotating thing, the concern I'd have there is that some of those arborists are more expensive than others. And you'd end up forcing somebody to hire an arborist that would be more expensive than another arborist that would give the same result at a cheaper price. And so that would be a concern that I would have unless you're going to try and standardize arborist pricing, which again, you're now forcing the city into some decision on how to price things. And I think that's problematic. But coming back to Dennis's point, which I really like, what you're basically could say here is, in the case of questions or issues about the report, the city can, on your dime, hire somebody to do a validation of the report of that review, that changes the conversation between the applicant and their arborist initially, because their arborist is going to come back and say, you're pressuring me to make these fair trees into poor trees. If we do enough of those, someone's going to complain about it, because whenever we do subdivisions, you've got a lot of feedback from residents nearby. You've got a lot of review, a lot of people looking at these things. And if questions come up about the arborist report, if there's enough questions, the city's going to spend additional developer money to hire another arborist to go do it. I think in that case, you could say, if questions come up, the city will use deposit money, whatever that is, to hire an arborist to satisfy questions that they have. So that, I think that may solve a lot of these problems just by adding new wording here in the case of issues or questions with the arborist report, that the city has a right to hire an arborist to do a second opinion on it.
Alderman Whitmire.
Do we have such language in place today regarding traffic studies? We were following that metaphor before. Do we, you know what I mean? Do we have to change the code to say what Commissioner McKnight just said?
It's under the powers of the PMZ.
Well, I think you've got a right to, if you're going to make them pay for it, we probably ought to say that, but you've got a right to have any experts, to retain any experts you want to deal with any of these issues, in my opinion. You could reverse it and say, that we're going to have an arborist look at this. That you're going to pay for it. And if you don't like what he says, you go out and hire another arborist.
Mhm.
It's another way of, skinning the cat, but it's also going to, it may result in, I'm in thinking about the idea of putting in their face, right, they select the arborist, they select the arborist, we have to prove them. And putting language in there that says, and by the way, if that arborist comes back with a report that we don't like, we have a right, we reserve the right to hire another arborist on your dime to take a look at it. And what that's going to do to arborist one is to say to the owner or developer, hey, look, don't pressure me on this, because if you do, and they go bring another arborist in, he's going to say I'm wrong. And that, so maybe setting it up that way is a better way to go.
Ms. Lowell, did you have a comment?
Not at this time.
Okay. Mr. Spencer.
I was just going to weigh in and say I support the positions made by Commissioner Bolzina, McKnight, and City Attorney Garrett. I think that has a lot of merit, and I think that's a way to cut the Gordian knot, if you will, and get through the issue here.
Wow, Gordian knot, nice.
Oh.
Smith. Mr. Miller Smith.
Going to conquer Asia Minor next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it may be obvious there was an intent to my initial question of asking Alderman Whitmire to explain his intent putting forth this proposal. Because in my mind, there is a significant difference between selecting and approving. And Mr. Chairman, you articulated it perfectly. We've had a recent experience where an arborist report was questioned by the city, and merely questioning it resulted in significant change to what the arborist was telling us. And that, in my mind, is a cause that we need to, or a reason we need to avoid a repeat of that. So there needs to be considerably more control put in the hands of the city. I don't have a solution for exactly how that ought to be done. There have been some suggestions tonight, so I would conclude that this matter should be postponed and reworked. But this could excuse me, this commissioner is decidedly in favor of putting much more control into the hands of the city because of the subjectivity that we've experienced in the past.
If we were going to move this on to the next, we would just continue it. Is that what we would need to do? To give you time to edit? I think you're muted, Ryan.
I would ask for continuance, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Well, given that, do I have a motion to continue?
Wait,
There'll be an opportunity for discussion, Alderman.
Okay. So moved.
All right, we've got
February 19th, is that the next?
a motion to our, what's the date?
January 19th,
19th, yes.
2022.
January 19th meeting. Do I have a second?
second.
Seconded by Leland Smith. All right, Alderman Woodland.
Yeah, so while we were working through this, I know we weren't trying to change other parts of the code, but Commissioner Bolazina brought up the matter of, we inserted in this draft, the words grand trees are inserted into the draft. Clusters of trees were in there before, and there was some confusion over why that was even there, if this was to do with woodlands. And I was just wanted to seek clarification before we left this meeting. My understanding that woodlands contain, plant material, which may be just generally woodlands, or might be tree clusters, or might be grand trees, but all of those things make up the woodlands. I mean, it gets a little weird, but that's why I thought all that stuff was in there, and why it made sense to leave it in there, because it defines what a woodlands is, or the elements of a woodlands. And do we want to, I guess my question is, do we want to try and sort that as a part of this process when we come back with a revised draft, or just leave that alone for another day?
Mr. Bolazina?
Yeah, I don't think it's inclusive. I think it's accretive. I think you are, and to some extent, different. So the thing about a tree cluster is something less than a woodland. And a grand tree is something by itself. So I don't think it is inclusive. So I think it's pretty clear. I mean, I understand Ryan wanting this information, but I also have a concern that we're making somebody pay for something that's not required for approval under the ordinance. So we don't have to look at grand trees under this particular provision of the ordinance. We don't have to look at tree clusters, and that's a separate little item between Ryan and myself. We need to use the defined term of tree clusters, which is a defined clause in our definitions, rather than a cluster of trees. That's a fine point. But I'm not going to follow my sword on this issue. If the city thinks it's a great idea and it's an inconsequential addition to the arborist report, okay, it's information. But I don't think it's information necessary for the approval under this provision of the code.
Okay.
Further discussion? Mr. Leland Smith?
I would disagree with Commissioner Bolazina in that I would like to have as much information before me relative to the site as possible. And I would not want to limit it to just the woodlands as defined. I would like to understand the context of all the vegetation on that site, because I think it's all relative.
Mr. Spencer?
And I apologize. I don't want to belabor the point because this is another kind of subjective aspect of the arborist report, is defining a woodland and a tree cluster. As I stated earlier, the city expects the tree stand delineation to show all trees 6 inches in caliper or greater, wherever they are on the site. A woodland is defined as 5,000 square feet of area of trees, woody plant material of 6 inch caliper trees or greater. a tree cluster is less than 5,000 square feet. It's very important for that certified arborist to delineate if it's a tree cluster or a woodland, because there are very specific regulations that apply just to woodlands. So the city, the residents, the developer, everyone needs to understand where there's a woodland and where there's a cluster, because there's a set of regulations that kicks in as part of that in terms of permanent open space and so forth. And the grand trees, as was stated earlier, that's a separate item, separate regulations that will show up as, for individual trees.
Okay.
Mr. McKnight?
Just to make sure I understand, Ryan, what you were saying there was, I mean, grand trees, as I'm reading the thing anyway, any disturbance of grand trees is going to have to be addressed anyway. So, as I'm reading the grand tree section of this, it's, any disturbance is going to require.
Unless it's
unless it's dead.
dead tree, right?
By including grand trees in this listing, you're just saying that they need to be highlighted in a report that we can see.
The city wants to know where all grand trees are and their condition, because if they're a healthy grand tree, you are going to plant replacements or pay a fee to a tree bank.
And ultimately, in the language of the description, they would have to do that anyway, but you're just saying you want it in the report so we can see it up front.
Absolutely.
Okay. So we're not changing the requirement on the developer, save from when you do your survey, you have to include grand trees.
Well, I think originally, Alderman Whitmire and I were talking about the percentage of grand trees we want to replace, correct? Alderman,
That's one of the things we were talking about, yeah.
right, because currently we require 25% caliper replacement, and the question was, is that appropriate? Should it be higher? What's the basis for that? We decided that was a bridge too far at this time, and to just move forward with the tree study aspect.
And I think, I would be acceptable to just adding it to the tree study, but I think it's something that I don't necessarily want to go too far afield, because I feel like the changes we're proposing here is really just about making sure that we can address arborist issues.
I would
not
prefer
necessarily how we're
doing. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Mellon-Smith?
At the risk of belaboring it, I just want to make clarification. Ryan,
Yes, sir.
you referenced that this applies to subdivisions and we average one a year.
Correct.
But it's not limited to just subdivision creation, correct?
It would be large non-residential developments as well, correct?
Yeah. And also, does it apply to infill?
No.
It does not apply to a tear down.
This specific section does not. Section 405.336, the next section, is specifically for infill development.
Okay, all right. But this one applies to subdivisions and
Right.
non-residential.
Right. Schools or
In all
senior
zones.
living, those kind of, retail centers would all have to do this kind
Okay,
of.
thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I just want to be sure that the scope is
Thank you.
clear to all of us.
Any other discussion?
And I will reinforce Ryan's comment about, so long as the tree stand delineation is a requirement for this submission, our definition of tree stand delineation is every tree greater than 6 inches, which I guess would include anything in a tree cluster and anything in the woodlands. So to that extent, so long as the arborist knows that they need to do what we call a tree stand delineation in our code, then we've captured it. So I mean, like I said before, I don't have any argument about doing it. I just want to make sure that we're not incurring or making a developer or anyone else incur expense that's unnecessary for an approval process. That's all. But it's there. It's probably insignificant. They got to count the trees anyway. we'll let it go.
Well, but
Alderman Whitmire.
to your point, if that's defined elsewhere, we'll take a look at it and tighten it down. There might be an opportunity to thin some of the words here because it's just redundant to the definitions elsewhere.
Okay, we have a motion to continue this to our January meeting. Ms. Lowell, will you call the roll?
Alderman Whitmire,
Aye.
Dr. O'Mell,
Aye.
Mr. Malin Smith,
Aye.
Chairman Sema,
I think you said aye.
oh, okay. Mr. McKnight,
Yes.
Mr. Bolazina,
Yes,
Mayor Reem,
Yes.
and Mr. White.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay. Let's see, do we have a report from the Board of Aldermen?
Yes, we do. So a couple of things on the Board of Aldermen meeting from November 22nd. We unanimously passed the boundary adjustment plat for 12,200 and 12,211 Wheatley Grove Road. That was all at that meeting. And then our most recent meeting on the 13th, we unanimously passed the measure that we had brought forward regarding single-family driveway gate regulations, as you call, just pushing them back to 30 feet. And then we had a first reading regarding the matter that we have brought forward regarding portable storage units and dumpsters. That's it.
Thank you. One other item of business before we adjourn. I know with the mask mandates being lifted, I think our intention would be to be back in person in January.
yay.
Mr. Malin Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Under other, I just wanted to raise an issue that I initially brought to our attention 2 meetings ago. And that is a pet peeve of mine, which is what I'll call the stump telephone poles along Clayton Road. And I want to compliment the staff and Mayor, if you had a hand in this, a compliment your way as well. So I noticed this past week, Ameren removing those stump poles, at least on what I'll call Ward 3. And I'm delighted to see that. I think those poles serve no purpose, and I think they're certainly less than attractive, and the removal of them is a positive. So
I think the credit, if I could, Mr. Senior, that goes to Ryan and to Laura too. They did a great job of pursuing that. So I would give them credit. The only other comment I would make is we are back in session without masks at the Board of Aldermen meetings. When that decision was made, there had been a fairly significant drop off in COVID cases, but we wanted to didn't want to change it in the middle of November, so we waited till December. We're going to continue, but I have to say I have some misgivings about it. I've seen some colleges have now suspended on-campus teaching because of the rise in cases. At our Mercy hospitals, there's been more than a doubling of inpatient COVID cases in the last 6 weeks or so. I'm not opposed to going in person. This is a pandemic that's been tough to break the back of it. And it's something that when I think of my own patients, some of whom have been vaccinated and some of whom are facing a pretty rough stretch, if they hopefully they can get off a ventilator, some of them. But I would just say I'm caution. I mean, we unfortunately we don't have a magic bullet the vaccine's good, the boosters a help. It's not perfect. Wearing masks help. They're not perfect. Social distancing helps, but we're not at the magic bullet yet. I'm very hopeful that some of the medications that are being proposed, hopefully for emergency use by Pfizer, to take if you develop COVID, look to be incredibly effective. And that may be, along with vaccinations, that silver bullet that we're looking for. I would not argue against going back in person. I can tell you that, at least from interpersonal interaction, as you all know, face-to-face in person is infinitely better than doing it by Zoom. I completely agree. I hope that by the time of our next meeting in late January, this won't be an issue. We're not seeing a continuation of this surge, but right now I have a little bit of pause, and that's the only comment I'd make.
All right, well, that's good enough for me. We'll reevaluate that as we get closer, and we may make a call to go Zoom for a little longer. Mr. White.
I just want to endorse everything that the mayor's just said. You know, as an amateur, I've been tracking these cases since it began last year. And the number of new cases in Missouri has gone up 4 times since last month. We're now getting into the 4,000 cases a day. We thought we'd broken it 2 months ago. It was down below 1,000. We're now over 4,000, and I've seen it climbing this month, even since November. So we want to be very cautious in this. And I think every citizen in the country needs to be responsible to the rest of the people and do everything they can to stop this from continuing, quite frankly. So that's just want to put my 2 cents in, and I do endorse everything that the mayor said.
I'll go with whatever the mayor says.
Mr. McKnight.
I mean, I would just add, I think this works pretty well in Zoom. It certainly works well in person. So I like being erring on the side of caution if necessary, or if we feel like it. And I think I would go either way, but I like the idea of erring on the side of caution. So my opinion.
Yeah, I think we've been able to have effective meetings, and I'm happy to continue in Zoom. But at some point, I think it's easier for our fellow town and country citizens to. We just seem to have fewer that want to show up on a Zoom. We have a lot more input in our public meetings, so just something I'm aware of. All right, do I have Alderman Whitmire?
Just a thought. I mean, we might want to think about the agenda. The elements of the agenda, if it's fairly innocuous stuff, more conducive to Zoom. If it's something where a lot of people might be involved, might be a different situation.
Yep. Dr. O'Mell.
Just to note, the professional sports, particularly the NFL, which has over 100 players now out and 94% were vaccinated. I think this decision maybe should be made 2 weeks, or maybe hold off and judge what the incident rate is in our locale. I think the surge is just beginning, and the vaccine doesn't seem to have a tremendous effect on getting infected. So I would think make a decision based on the current environment, maybe a couple of weeks before the meeting.
Okay, Ms. Lowell?
I think that when I send out my next forum request, we can probably assume that your availability should be based off of whether or not you're in person or via Zoom or both. Preferably probably both. Just in case we do need to reevaluate, we can make that switch.
That's a good point.
All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mayor Ream. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion appears to carry unanimously.
Aye.
Happy holidays, everyone. Hope you all have
Merry
a
Christmas,
Happy
happy holidays.
We will
Happy
see
holidays.
you
See you next
in
year.
2022.
See you next year. Bye.